The other two legs that I want to talk about in just a little bit more detail are the Port Access Route Study and the Arctic Waterway Safety Committee. Port Access Route Study. For those who are familiar with the maritime environment, this will look very similar to a vessel traffic scheme, except in this case, what we are proposing is a voluntary measure, and that it will provide basically a roadmap for folks who are traveling from Unimak Pass through the Bering Strait. And the intent here is to make for a safer transit, not just for the vessels that are for transiting there, but others who are working the area, whether they be fishing vessels, for inhabitants of the area, whether it be subsistence hunters or those who are otherwise using the waterway, that we are going to increase a level of predictability where the majority of transiting vessels will go. We'll have an idea of where that is going to be and what courses they will follow. That'll also increase navigational safety in and of itself, and it'll provide an increased level of efficiency for the companies operating those vessels. Beyond the Port Access Route Study, I wanted to finish up my short discussion this morning with what I believe to be one of the most important initiatives currently underway in the Arctic. And to steal a comment from the President last night, I wanted to mention that the group that I believe is taking on an amazing amount of effort and putting forward just work that benefits not only the communities in the Arctic, but all those who will in the future be operating there. What we have put forward in just words in the past, they have actually brought into reality the end of last year, and that is the Arctic Waterway Safety Committee. These are folks who are building upon a model that has been used throughout ports in the rest of the United States in how they want to manage operations, but they are taking it well beyond just a single port. As complex as Los Angeles or Long Beach or Tacoma might be, they are looking at the Arctic writ large and have decided that instead of dozens or 100 voices speaking individually, if they come together as subsistence hunters, as industry, as other representatives, and they come forward and say, this is what is important for the safe use of the waterways, this is what is important for us to allow to continue on with our way of life, this is what is important for the economic development of Alaska, they are far more powerful as a group than they would be individually. And I applaud their efforts because this is not only a difficult task, but one that they're achieving with amazing speed. To be able to come up with this idea, incorporate it really in the short period of time that it has happened, I believe is amazing, particularly when you consider government or government-like organizations to get this many people with differing opinions to agree that this is a way forward really reflects well on the chairman and his leadership, but overall on the committees coming together and deciding that this is the way forward for a safe and productive environment in the future. And so with that, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jim, or Charlie. That was a great overview of some of the things that have going on. You know, I do want to give a shout out to a couple things that were mentioned. You know, this idea of having a voluntary vessel traffic separation scheme is something that Meade Treadwell came up with, you know, 3 or 4 years ago now, and we've had coffee and beers and wine over on how you could add some sanity to the way people are going through the Bering Strait, and how that could add through compliance with a voluntary schema on greatly enhance the safety. So it's one of those things that, you know, really started in a group not unlike this, where somebody had an idea and we kind of pushed it forward and we continue to push it forward, and we talked to IMO and we found the 2 hard boxes for things, and we finally have moved this along, and D17 has picked that up and has moved it along a long way. I can't tell you, and I can't overemphasize how some of these governance structures, and as Fran mentioned last night, these governance structures are critically important, and the work that guys like Bob Herron and others have done over time to start setting the stage for how we're going to operate are critically important, if not as important as the infrastructure itself going forward. Also, a number of things were mentioned, and you know, there's going to be a test at the end of this. You know, the polar code, vessel traffic separation schemes, route studies. those are things everybody in this room needs to understand and needs to have some clarity on what they mean and how they come together as we look to move forward in the Arctic. And to continue on this governance theme, we have Robert Loken coming up to talk to us next about the work that he's doing and what's going on, in that governance and oversight perspective on the Arctic. So without further ado, Robert, thank you.
Admiral, thank you. Good morning, President Grimson, my esteemed colleagues from Nome, Alaska, ladies and gentlemen. It's my honor to represent the Maritime Administrator today, and I would like to thank all the conference organizers, sponsors, and the participants for making this event possible. The Maritime Administration actively supports the National Arctic Strategy in advancing U.S. interests in responsible stewardship of the Arctic and strengthening international cooperation. MARAD plays a key role through promoting a healthy and robust maritime industry, a coordinated approach in identifying port infrastructure needs and improvements, and being a good steward of the environment. We do this by seeking a balanced approach in meeting needs of establishing a national maritime strategy, which is currently in review by DOT and hopefully will be published later on this year, and through such programs as the Strong Port Program by providing port planning and investment toolkits to level the playing field for all ports, through Tiger grants providing over $520 million to 44 ports for port infrastructure improvements, through working issues that have been identified through Port Talk, which we'll be working with the Port of Nome, through environmental planning and coordination, through DOT's Build America Transportation Investment Center, which many folks may not be aware of, through using TIFIA loans, which is a 35-year loan for large capital improvements with rates at or better than the bond rates, for transfer of government property through land conveyance, through facilitating discussions with federal, state, native, metropolitan, and non-government levels to identify ways to accomplish goals. The Maritime Administration has worked together with the International Maritime Organization to develop the Polar Codes, which we've talked about, for ship personnel and environmental safety. We work closely with our federal partners to improve the security, situational awareness, provide emergency response, and containing of oil spills, and in advancing the U.S. interests in the Arctic. Along with other engagements, we're involved with coordinating research, technology, guidance, and advisory. So based on the most recent report from the Committee on Maritime Transportation Systems that came out in January, we know that shipping will increase in the Bering Sea and through the Bering Straits. That extrapolates to increasing challenges of maintaining the safety and security of shipping in the Bering Sea when there are limited resources, few places to pull in for safe harbor and to make repairs, extreme distances that can be compounded with adverse weather conditions and a delicate ecosystem. The times will be long and the costs high as we breach each of these challenges. And identifying some of the risk reductions, MARAD is committed in the long haul for meeting the nation's Arctic strategy and working with our partners to meet each deadline. The way I sort of look at it like the old adage that it takes a village to raise a child. That's not true for the Arctic. It takes a nation to build the Arctic, and failure is not acceptable. So, thank you.
Thank you, Rob. What I'd like to do at this point is thoughts, questions, comments, challenges. Anybody have have anything they'd like to ask of the panel or of myself, or anything you'd like to contribute, this is a good opportunity to do that. And then we're going to step off and take a head break and a coffee break. Questions? Denise, I should have known. I should have just said, now Denise is going to talk. Yeah, so Mike will be going around, so please grab it.
Sorry, thank you. Captain, you were saying voluntary measures for the PARs. Are we still pushing it through the IMO for adoption?
Ultimately, we will get to the IMO, but because right now we are using it on the U.S. side alone, the intent is to push forward as a voluntary measure. That way we can get it in place sooner than later. And that does mean we're not consulting with Russia for their awareness, but not necessarily looking for consent at this time.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure my white paper was correct then.
Good. Yes, sir.
On the
Sounds good.
on the transit numbers. On the transit numbers, can you give an aspect of scale? I mean, 200 transits, that's great, but what's happening elsewhere? Is it 10,000 elsewhere? So is 200 a big number or a small number? I think it's small, but I think it'd be good to have some aspect of scale in what we're seeing in shipping.
Yep.
So by transit mean is 250 vessels operating north of the Bering Strait. Is that a big number?
Yeah, or the 70 transits through the Bering Straits as a through transit, either one.
Sure, and I would say if you compare it to Unimac Pass with 4,500, or the size of the ships going in there, it's relatively small. But remember, it's still a relatively young area for operations. If you look over to the west and what the Russians are doing, taking natural resources out there year-round through heavy icebreaker assistance, you'll see those numbers are much larger because they have the infrastructure there and able to do so. So I would say compared to what the potential is for in the future, the numbers are very small. Depending on climate change and our ability to develop resource extraction, those numbers here we'll see could be very small as well.
Yeah, the one thing I'd also add on those numbers is, there's numerators and denominators and all these things, and that's a very small period of time. So that's not, when you look at the way ships travel through Unimac Pass, that's 12 months of the year. So when you have 400 ships going through there in a 2 or 3 month period, you do have a traffic density issue that's also not well represented by those pictures. So there are some days, and you've talked to folks up in the area, where you'll see a dozen ships go by and you're like, wow, what was that? And so there is some, there's a scale there and a proportion that time plays into as well. Questions? Good. I'm glad we had a question because no one was leaving the room for a head break until we had one. So it's perfect. Please, everybody, take about 7 minutes, and then we'll be back in here for the second half. Thank you.